one of the things I absolutely love about podcasting is anybody can do it. Now, it doesn't mean everybody's going to do it well, but anybody can do it, and anybody can put their, for better or worse, their message out there, their thoughts, their feelings, their intentions. So that's one thing I really love about it. We live in an amazing age of.
Welcome to Occupation Insights, where we discuss jobs and career opportunities. Hi! Today we're with Johnny. Johnny is the owner of Flores Podcast Productions. He helps businesses and associations to develop and produce high quality content that align with their mission and marketing objectives. Johnny has been in this podcasting industry for over 11 years, and he is here to share his journey with us and his experience. Welcome, Johnny. How are you doing
Thanks
today?
for having me. Nice, nice
Thank
to
you
meet
for
you.
coming.
Yeah, thank
Okay.
you.
I feel like 11 years in this industry, you have a lot to share. Let's start with your background. How did you start?
Uh, Completely by accident. I had tried in 2010, 11, or trying to do a podcast with some friends and didn't know what to do. I didn't even know how to load. We recorded some stuff and we did it entirely the wrong way. And then I kind of gave up because I was like, I don't know how to I don't know how to put this on the internet. Um and then about several months later, my neighbor across the street, he came up to me and said, "Hey, I've got all this recording equipment. Do you want to do a podcast?" And I had just started listening to podcasts at that time. Um, and I was like, "Yeah, yeah. What do you want to do?" And he's like, "I don't know. You come up with the idea. I think you're funny, and you should come up with something." And okay. So I went home and sat on it for a couple days, um, and I'm a bit of a nerd. I was like, okay, I'll do something kind of like a nerd roundtable pop culture kind of thing. And it was called No Nipples on the Suit, which is a reference to the George Clooney Batman movies. And we did that for about a year and a half, 2 years. And I made all the mistakes you could possibly make podcasting. I posted stuff inconsistently. Our audio was all over the place. We had way too many people on microphones, and but I learned a lot from it. And then about a year later, about a year and a half later, after stopping it because people got started having kids and just life kind of got in the way. I thought, okay, I'll do another one, but it's just gonna be me and a guest. It'll be so much easier to manage it. Um, so then I created this podcast called Serious Talk Seriously that was about. I live in Sacramento, California, and it was about people that lived here and were, I thought, contributing to making the city unique. Sacramento kind of lives in the shadow of San Francisco. We're always like the ugly stepsister of cities in California because there's San Diego, LA, San Francisco. It's kind of hard to stand out and be unique amongst those three. And I had lived in San Diego and LA for several years before moving back to Sacramento. And when I got back here, I was involved in the art scene, and I was just like, I'm meeting so many cool people that do neat things and just make this place a really really unique place to call home. And so that was sort of the genesis. Was I'll call on these people to show and celebrate our uniqueness. Like we are different than San Francisco. Um, and the podcast took off, and people eventually, guests that I had on, started moving up into leadership positions within their employers, and then they started asking me to help them make podcasts, and that's how the ball got rolling on it.
When you first started in 2010, 2011, was there big podcast marketing? Was it easy for you to find the tutorials and resources that you needed, or was it challenging?
Oh no, yeah, it was hard to find stuff. Like YouTube was in its infancy, so there wasn't a lot of content on there. My girlfriend's dad worked in radio and TV most of his adult life. So I'd go and ask him questions, and he had no idea what a podcast was. I remember I asked him about creating a podcast network. I was like, I think I could get enough podcasters together to in Sacramento to kind of do, maybe even the Bay Area, do like a a podcast network of just like Northern California podcasts that people could kind of tune in. We can use that as like an um, like our collective numbers to go get advertising or something like that. And I remember him. He was like, "Okay, so when the podcast isn't playing, do you have a license to stream music?" I was like, "No, no, no. It's not like that. It's like you just go and listen to it when you want. Like, grocery stores open X amount of hours. You have to go in and get the thing when it's available. That's radio. And podcasting is like a 24-hour convenience store. You can go and get it whenever you want." And then he's like, "Okay, I still don't quite understand it." And he goes, "And what about at the top and the bottom of the hour? Are you doing traffic and weather reports?" And I was like, "No, it's not like that at all." So yeah, there wasn't a ton of resources back then.
Back in time when you just started, you still had to explain people what podcasting is and how it's going to be going. Did you see at the time that it could be your future? That 11 years from then, you will be sitting here having your own podcast production agency? Or did you think it was just a, 1 year activity, 2 year activity, just a hobby like?
No, well, yes and no. Felt something felt right about it. I had tried to make it as a illustrator for years, and I got burned out on that. Um, and then when I started, so I was looking for some sort of creative outlet. I didn't know what it was, and when I started doing podcasting, I was like, "Oh, this feels right." Like I don't know what it is about podcasting. Um, that's not entirely true. I grew up a really super big fan of Johnny Carson and David Letterman. Like I loved those two as a kid. I would sneak out when my mom went to bed. I would sneak back out and plug in my headphones into the TV and just stay up until 2 a.m. whenever David Letterman ended, like 1:30 in the morning, whatever, all through grade school. So like that kind of, I think that sort of appealed to me too. But just I don't know, it was just a creative outlet. And I was like, I don't know what will happen with this, but I'm gonna stick with it and see what comes. I was just kind of open to, I'm just gonna jump in the stream and see where it carries me. And yeah, and I just stuck with it. And I just innately, like a sponge, I just soaked up any information about it. I would and I kept trying to get better at it. And I was just reading things and following um experts that had when the YouTube channel started popping up. So I was really kind of self learning, kind of doing my own education around it.
At what point did you understand that it could be more than just an enthusiastic activity, something that could actually bring profit and money?
When two things, one was when Serial exploded, when that podcast kicked the door open for the general public, like not just hobbyists and like, you know, um, and fans of like the small market of fans. It was like people who were into zines back in the 90s. There wasn't a ton of them, but the people who were fans of zines were really into them. Um, and then when Serial came along, that really opened the door. And I was like, okay, everybody's just the population of people who listen to him, especially in the United States, just exploded. I was like, okay, that's one level we needed. And then the other one for me on a micro level versus the macro of Serial was when people started asking me to help them with their podcast, and they'd be like, "What would you charge for this?" And I was like, "I have no idea." And they're like, Would you do it for this amount of money?" I was like, "Sure, yeah, absolutely." And that's when I was like, "Okay, well, maybe I could do something with this, like as a profession."
Nowadays, 2024, do you feel like podcasting can be a sustainable career?
Yes, but you have to be. So the industry at large that got picked up by like Wondery and Sirius XM and all the like iHeartMedia and stuff like that. I don't know. I They've had so many layoffs off and on over the past couple of years, and especially the beginning of this year. I And then me as just like an independent, I feel like I have more stability, even though there's ups and downs with freelancing than they do because I know who my dream clients are. I can speak to directly. I have my clients really dialed in. And so it makes it much easier for me to present to them because I know what they're looking for versus someone who's like trying to get a job with a bigger organization, you're at the whim of them picking up like the New York Times as a client for a couple years, or them overspending on trying to find the next Joe Rogan. And then when that doesn't work out, they lay off that production team. So, um, if that answers your question.
Absolutely, yes. At what point did you understand that it might be a good idea to open your own production company?
It wasn't me per se. It was my girlfriend. She had been telling me for a solid year about, um, she's like, I hated my job that I had at the time. And I was miserable. I was so unhappy. And, but when you're like, well, what else am I going to do? I was like, my mindset, I had such a negative mindset. Um, and then I was a middle manager at a municipal animal shelter, so I dealt with the public a lot, and I'd always tell my staff that were underneath me, like, because we dealt with some really crappy people sometimes, just angry, bitter, messed up people, and I would tell my staff, like, don't go to their level. Like, we win by not being them. Like, they're stuck living their lives, and we're just in it for 30 minutes or an hour, and then they have to go live that life, and we could go be happy on our lives. So, like, don't go to their level. And this person came in, and uh, we were close to the public, but I was the only supervisor that day, and or not, well, for the front. And this person was just rude as hell, and I went off on them. I don't know if we can cuss on this, but I basically told them to F off, like, get the F out of the building, just went off on them. And as soon as they left, I was like, "Oh no, I need to quit. I can't work here anymore." I went to their level, and I went to the deputy director, because my boss wasn't there. It was like a skeleton crew on the days we were close to the public. And so I went to the deputy director, and I was like, "Hey, I think I need to quit." Well, one, you're probably gonna get a complaint from this person, and they're justified because I went off on them. And then two, I think I need to quit, and I think I need to quit soon. And she's like, "No, no, no, you're fine. I'll cover for you." I was like, "Don't cover for me. Like, don't. I deserve. If she makes a complaint, I deserve to get punished. Like, not a punishment. What do they call that? Written up or whatever." But and so then I called my girlfriend. I went back up to my office, and I called my girlfriend. I was like, "Hey, I think I need to quit." And I told her what happened. She's like, "I've been telling you to quit. Quit. We'll figure it out. Just quit. We'll figure it out. Don't worry about it." And my boss came back on Tuesday. I was supposed to go on vacation. So I was like, "Oh, I'll do my 2 weeks. We'll go on vacation. I'll come back, and then I'll do my 2 weeks and leave." And then I was sitting at my desk. I was like, "Wait, I think I could just make my vacation my 2 weeks." So I talked to my boss, and she's like, "Well, let me check into it." And that was on a Tuesday. Wednesday, she was like, "Yeah, you can make that your 2 weeks. Turn it in now." And then Thursday was my last day, and then I normally had Fridays and Saturdays off, and that was the start of my vacation. So then that Thursday was my last day, and yeah, and then I was off to the races. Well, I shouldn't say that. It was a little bit of a struggle at first, but yeah, that's how I got going on in my business.
You already had the background being a host and talking to people on the podcast and sort of uploading it online, but I'm sure being an owner of the production company is more duties, it's more taxing, it's more complicated than that. What kind of challenges did you face while being an owner at the beginning?
Finding clients, that was a big hurdle. I didn't know what to do. My mental health was really low at that time because I had just from a toxic work environment. I didn't have any belief in myself. And a guest that I had on probably the second or third year of my podcast, she must have seen something in me that was entrepreneurial, and she had told me after the interview, and she does so much good in our community. Her name's Tina Reynolds. She owns a marketing company called Uptown Studios. She's an amazing person. Had told me, if you ever start your own business, come talk to me. I'll guide you. I'll mentor you. I'll give you some help. And the first couple months afterwards, I was like, I can't. No one's gonna hire me. This is dumb. I should just go back and get my job. And like my just talking to myself was very negative. My girlfriend was like, "No, go talk to Tina. She told you if you ever start your business, she would help you. So go talk to Tina." So I did. I called her up and she was like, "Yeah, come in. Can you come in tomorrow? And I'll sit down with you after work and we'll hash out everything you need to do." And she just walked me through so many things. And she's like, I had a LinkedIn account, but I never used it. She's like, "Go update your LinkedIn, do a bunch of stuff on there, and then you let me know when it's done, and I'll push you out through my network." And she knows everybody in town. And that really, after she did one thing, and I had a couple people contact me, and I got my first client. Like, you know, after fully investing in starting my business, and that was the first major hurdle. The other one, and I didn't solve this. I've been doing this 6 years now, and I didn't figure this out until about year 3 or 4. Was who my clients are. I was just scrambling for anybody. It didn't matter if the podcast was right for their business. And now I'll tell people, I'm like, you shouldn't have a podcast. You need X or Y, or like, why would, like, I don't know if this is going to serve you. You're going to spend money on something and it's not going to be effective. But then back then I was just like, yeah, you want to do a podcast? Let's do a podcast, and so that was I'd say that was like the second, maybe even the final hurdle. Was really, here's who I serve. This is the services I provide for them. Here's why I work well with them, and here's why they need to work with me. And that, yeah, that was kind of the last real hurdle. I guess maybe 3 was getting like a professionally done my logo, getting that done, and my website really dialed in so that it reflected. I always tried to present as fun but professional, and so I tried doing that on my own. I went to I didn't never completed it, but I went to school for graphic design, and I had an illustrating background. So I had a couple. I'd done my own logo, but it was so basic. It didn't really convey what I wanted it to convey. So I did trade for production, and they did my website and my logo, and that was like it. Once I had those 3 things locked in, it's been fairly,
Done.
yeah. I won't say easy, but it makes businesses, it's easier for them to say yes to me because they can tell it's a professional operation. It's not a hobbyist trying to, like, and it's nothing against hobbyists. You got to start somewhere. I was a hobbyist, and you can get to this level too, or no, I should say this level, but there's a path through to like being a professional production person. Um, you just have to figure out that who it is you're serving and how to talk to them.
Absolutely. It seems like within this years you became more defined and just you had your vision from the very beginning. I can feel your enthusiasm about this industry and podcasting in general. And I feel like now having your own company, and it's like your child where you said you have a logo, you have a website, it became more structured, which helps you now to find the customers and secure the projects. Tell us a bit more about your day-to-day life. Is it 9 to 5, or is it 60 hours a week? How's it going for you, day-to-day operations?
No, I'm lazy. So I I try to I there's a the band might be a little tool for you, but the Strokes have a line in one of their songs called "I'm working so I don't have to try so hard," and that's sort of like my motto is I work so I can be lazy. Uh, so no, I structure my day. I tend to have certain days that I'll record with clients, and then other days that I just do editing and sort of like correspondences and stuff like that. And then Fridays are kind of like my lazy, do whatever I want day. I'll do my QuickBooks on Friday just so I'm always trying to stay on top of like my oh, my screen just went blank. Can you still oh, sorry, my
Yeah,
my
with us.
screen
Yeah.
went blank. So I try to where was I? QuickBooks. So I try to do my QuickBooks just to stay up on top of like my profits and losses and stuff like that, because being a sponge, someone had told me if you don't stay on top of your QuickBooks or your ledger, it's so hard to keep your business running, or you're going to pay someone else to do it and they're going to charge you a ton of money. So, so yeah, so that's kind of like my week. I, I'll kind of, I don't get really started till about 10 a.m. and then I'll work until about 5 on different things. And then other times I'm just doing stuff around the house. My girlfriend goes to work, so I try to keep the house clean, just do the stuff so that when she comes home, because I don't have to drive anywhere,
Aw.
so I'm just like, hey, come home and just chill. And then yeah, so that's kind of I kind of get to do what I want. It's really nice.
How did your income change during these years from having a hobby to owning a business now? During this last 10, 11 years, do you see an exponential growth or is it more project related?
Uh there could be room for exponential growth, but I don't want to um grow my business like that. I'm really happy just it being me, me doing mentorship to help other people, um, other freelancers or people who are trying to get into production, like professional production, helping them do their own thing. Um, so the room could be there for exponential growth, but I really don't want to do that. And then as far as like financial stuff, I was pretty much making what I was making when I was employed with our local county. Um, and then the pandemic hit and my income just went down the toilet. I barely had any money coming in for a good 6 months, and then I qualified. Luckily, our city, uh, government did a creative economy grant, so if you were involved in the creative arts in any way, as long as you could say, "This is what I do," um, they were giving out grants during the pandemic. So I got one of those grants, and then one of my clients just paid me out for the work because I kept working with them. They're like, "What can you do? Could you stay within this price range?" I was like, "Yeah, please. I that's it. That's all I have for money." So yes, I could do that for sure. And then when their budget opened up, because I get paid out of marketing budgets, they just paid me out. So I just basically got two huge lump sums at the end of the year that really saved my butt. I was close to just being like, I'll go back to work for the county. And then 20 so that was 20 to 21 were kind of touch and go just before the pandemic like lockdown. I used to have a studio. I do everything remotely now like your production. Um and I had all these potential clients on the hook. So I like upgraded my equipment. I was like, this is gonna be great. Next year's gonna 2020 is just gonna be amazing. And then was that March, that second week of March, and everything shut down. Everyone was like, sorry, we can't sign any contracts. I was like, no. And everybody that I had contracts with said, we can't pay you. We know we're violating the contract, but we're not gonna be able to pay you until maybe several months, maybe not till next year. I was like, oh no. So 2021 were rough. 22 things started kind of coasting back to normal. And then 23, I made more than I'm not making like $100,000 a year or anything like that, but I made more than I did what at my last county job. And this year I'm probably gonna make about another 7 to 10,000 more than that. So it's growing. But yeah, I just have people know me as like Mr. Podcast in town. So that really helps with I just get a lot of word of mouth business. So
I think nowadays a lot of people do listen to podcasts, and there is a platform for it like Apple Podcast, Spotify Podcast. And oftentimes I hear about them inviting famous people to go and set your own podcast, and then will pay you billions or millions of dollars just for you to release those 10 episodes. When we talk about people like us that want to start their own thing and want to start their own podcast from scratch and want to make it their business, what are the income streams we're talking here about?
most people aren't going to have income streams. I think this is how we got connected was through the podcasting Reddit page, which I try to do mentorship on there too. And I tell folks, I'm like, don't get into podcasting thinking you're gonna, as a hobbyist, thinking you're gonna generate income. You should do it because you love it and you're passionate about the topic and you have fun making your podcast. Um, if you get in it thinking you're going to become famous or make, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars or even hundreds of dollars off your podcast, it's a recipe for um disappointment. Um so however, you can be strategical about trying to get to that point, but really just do it because you like to do it. And my clients don't, it's part of their marketing arm, so they're not interested in it being a sales, it kind of is a sales tool, but they're not directly making income from their podcast. They're using it to advertise what they do.
What are good skills or maybe education that makes a good podcaster? So, for example, if somebody had to ask you advice, and I know you've been working as a mentor on the side as well, so this is a mentorship type of question: is how do I become a good in podcasting? Where do I start?
Well, there's two sides to that. There's like professional production side, like what I do, and then as far as like someone who's wants to get into podcast, like they want their own podcast. I like a key thing is like, what is your niche? You have to find a niche and fill that void. If your podcast is real broad in general, it's hard to get an audience invested in your podcast because there's probably another podcast similar to that, but they're very specific about what they cover and what they do. So that's an important thing is like find your niche within the topic. So because of my nerd, I like to use Star Wars as an example. So I'll say you can have a Star Wars podcast, but guess how many Star Wars podcasts are out there? Probably thousands, if not tens of thousands. So you need to find out a niche within that podcast. So maybe you do a podcast about the bounty hunters in Star Wars, and then that can overlap into like main character, like the famous characters that they run into, and you can follow threads along there, but always um, under the purview of like it relates to the bounty hunters in the Star Wars universe. So that's like a main thing I like to tell folks is like you gotta find a niche and be passionate about it. The second one is be consistent. The reason podcasts don't find an audience or can't keep an audience if they find one is they inconsistently do things, so they don't post on the same day. um, they don't consistently communicate with their audience, so they don't tell the audience like, hey, there's a technical issue in this episode, or we're going on hiatus. And second to that, or I guess like a subset to that, is they don't communicate at the right time in the podcast. You should always communicate towards the beginning, not at the end, because most people don't make it to the end of a podcast, but they're there for the beginning. And then the other one is they make the podcast for themselves instead of, or they make it through the lens of their being for them as opposed to being for their audience. And that there's a very big difference between podcasts that are geared towards an audience and geared towards the hosts. Um, so those are sort of the main takeaways I like to give when I do mentorship or workshops or anything like that is like you got to fill those three things.
Tell us a bit more about your mentorship. I know you worked for different mentorship organizations in the past and currently. Tell us a bit more about that experience.
Sure. As we were talking a little bit before we started recording, like I can't do pro bono work anymore. I used to do pro bono production work, but it's just me, and I'm too busy to do that. Um, so I started doing much more mentorship. So like I work with the Podcast Academy. I've worked with Pod People in the past, and then I'll work with community organizations in Sacramento to basically they'll organize a group of people that they work with, and then I'll come in and basically help them do this. Just like, here's how you start a podcast. Here's the equipment you need. And I just like to give back that way. I had people mentor me and help me when I was starting off, so that's how try to give back to my community, and then locally, and then on a larger, you know, um, my
Scale.
macro look is with like the Podcast Academy, and then just because I like doing that. It's fun. I like helping people out. I like to make sure people aren't making the mistakes. And like I struggled at the beginning and I learned from it. So you don't need to struggle. Here's what I learned. And I like to tell folks I'm not the end all be all. take my advice, and whatever works for you, use that. What doesn't make sense or doesn't work, go find somebody else that's going to give you tips that will work for you, and then combine that information. Um, and there was another thing I was going to say too is, and then kind of on a selfish level, I like to help people so that podcasting is taken more serious, so that their podcasts are more professional and more polished, so that there is more validity behind it when people are like, oh, it's sort of just like a hobby thing that people do. And I'm like, well, no, there's professional aspects to this, and we can all present our podcasts in a more professional at a more professional level. So let me help you with that.
You worked as a county employee, then you quit, you started your own job, your own hosting gig, and now you're a business owner and a mentor. What is next? What is coming next for you? Do you have any steps for the future? Is it something you want to do for the rest of your life, or do you want to do something else, perhaps?
I don't know. This is really, I'm usually someone that tries to have a 2 to 5 year plan. And this is the first time in a while where I'm like, I don't know what the next 5 years look like. I've been approached a couple different times about coming in uh, and overseeing for like a bigger business that doesn't have anything to do with podcasting, but they want their own marketing department to do more on-demand media. That's really the approach I take anymore, is like I don't talk about podcasting per se when I present to for like a proposal, or someone asks like they want to talk about maybe possibly doing a podcast, is I don't talk about podcasting so much as I talk about on-demand media, because on-demand media overtook traditional media this year, or last year, I'm sorry, in the spring. So I really take that approach now, which I think is way more effective, especially with boards. So a marketing director might be like, "Yeah, we want to do this, but now I got to go get the board to sign off on it." And as we are right now, those boards tend to skew much older, like in the boomer generation, and they don't understand podcasting. T- not every one of them, but as a group, that more often than not, they don't get it. Um, but when I can tie those two together, on-demand media versus traditional media, the board's like, oh, okay, I see what he's talking about. Um, so those some of those bigger organizations we've had talks in the past about possibly me coming on as like an on-demand media director or something like that, but um, I'm not sold on sold on it, and they could tell I'm sort of like, well, sell me on it. I don't need to sell myself. You need to sell me on coming to work for you. Um, so that might be the future. I don't know. I might keep doing. I honestly don't know. This is the first time in a while where I'm like, I don't know what 2 years from now could look like. 5, 10. I don't know. Yeah.
It seems like even nowadays you sometimes find yourself explaining to especially older people what podcasting is and why your business needs it. But I feel like in comparison with, 10 years ago, I want to think we're in a much better spot, especially with all the platforms coming out and making it so accessible for you to just listen to anyone in the world, right? You drive a car, you're in the bathroom, just turn it on and listen to people talk about crimes, about news, about, Sacramento people. I'm in Canada and I can listen to what's happening in California. And I think that's fantastic. And so my question is, do you feel like there is a future for podcasting? What are the trends? What is out there for this industry? Or do you feel like it's overinflated and everyone can be a podcaster, which kind of ruins the thing? What is your opinion on that?
No, I don't think, one of the things I absolutely love about podcasting is anybody can do it. Now, it doesn't mean everybody's going to do it well, but anybody can do it, and anybody can put for better or worse, their message out there, their thoughts, their feelings, their intentions. So that's one thing I really love about it. We live in an amazing age of the tools and resources to make what you want, be it video, audio, animation, whatever, are incredibly affordable. It doesn't mean it's affordable for everybody, but it compared to what it used to cost, Robert Rodriguez, when he made his first movie El Mariachi, had to put like $80,000 on credit card debt to do to do that. And now you can really, I mean, it'd probably look, the production value would be almost the same, but you could do that for under $1,000. So, and now you can go rent equipment from library or check out stuff from libraries. There's community resources that will lend you stuff for very little or for free. So we live in the age of being able to, which leads to disinformation and other stuff like that. But we live in an age where anybody could do this, and I love that. I love that there's no longer a barrier of you have to be connected or you have to be funded to do what you want to do in media production. So I don't see it going away. If anything, I think there will be a separation between what is amateurish and what is professional, but that doesn't mean they're not both of value and substance. You know, the other thing I like to tell people in mentoring is like, they'll say like, well, we only have thirty listeners or we get 30 downloads per episode. And I'm like, yeah, yeah, like I have a couple things about this. Like one though, is like, imagine if those 30 people were in a room with you. That'd be very empowering. You'd feel good if you had a talk and 30 people showed up to hear you talk, and you every week those 30 people showed up to hear you talk. That's amazing. That's an amazing thing to do. Um, and then the other thing I like to equate it to is like, Conan O'Brien, Sarah Silverman, Joe Rogan, these people who have like millions upon millions and millions of downloads per episode is like, think of that as like being in a band. Think of your podcast as being in a band. Most bands don't do much more than play in their garage or play in the neighborhood with their friends, or some of them will go and play at like the local bars. Other bands get to kind of do little tours. Most bands and musicians aren't at the level of like a Taylor Swift or U2 or Bruce Springsteen or something like that. They're not at that level and they won't ever be. That's a fraction of a fraction of a fraction that achieve that success. Uh, so go into your podcast of like, hey, I just love like a garage band. I just love jamming with my friends in my garage, and you'll be much happier with what you put into your podcast.
We briefly talked about mistakes. And so my next question would be, if you could go back in time, 5, 10 years ago, other things that you would do differently, maybe educational aspect or technical or personal, or are you satisfied with how things turned out?
I'm f- I'm fairly satisfied. I went to school off and on for years. My girlfriend has a master's degree. I almost have as many credits as she does, and the only thing I have to show for are an AA and I went back and got a digital media certificate. So it's like, um, I think nowadays in fact, I'm one of our local colleges, junior colleges, community colleges. I'm helping them build out a podcast studio because they're going to start introducing a podcasting program. And when I was doing my digital media certificate, it was TV, radio, and film. And in the radio production, I was the only one in there that was like doing what I do. So I got a lot of the students that would come to me and be like, "Can you show us how a podcast is put together?" I was like, "Sure." Um, so it's sort of like they were there for the radio stuff, but then I was showing them how to do, like podcast production. So I, as far like going back and doing things differently, I don't know if I would. I struggled for a long time. I worked in the medical field. I'm kind of like Jack London. I did every job under the sun. I worked in the medical field for a long time. I hated it. I was an artist. I tried to make it as an illustrator. I I was trying to do writing for a while, and all of those mistakes, all those struggles, really the connections that I made too through art and just like just like I'm just gonna experiment. I tried doing improvisational comedy. I was just doing anything. I was like, what's gonna make a connection? And if I hadn't done all that stuff, if I hadn't moved, I moved so many times. Uh, this house that I've lived, our house that we bought, will be 8 years on St. Patrick's Day. This is the longest I've ever lived anywhere in my entire life, even when I was a kid. Um, if I all those experiences, all the mistakes, the successes, all that stuff contributed to me being able to do this now. So I don't know if erasing one thing to have a better outcome would make a better outcome for me now.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Johnny, for sharing your story. It was really fantastic to have you on our podcast, and we really appreciate you showing up. Thank you.
Thanks, Val. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. This was a lot of fun.
We're always looking for guests of various backgrounds for our next episode. If you would like to be a guest, please email us at occupationinsightstv, one word, at gmail.com.